All right, so we're back and still sticking with vision. I've got these examples of some geometric black and white, high contrast stimuli that pediatricians oftentimes say are really useful for showing, especially small babies. Small babies will find this really interesting, but small babies will tend to prefer the checkerboard pattern, the grid of big black circles, and the snowflake looking thing at the bottom middle over the close together lines, whether they're vertical or horizontal or in bullseye shape. That's going to be a lot for a little baby. And so the 2 month old, 3 month old will stare longer at checkerboard, big circles, and snowflake. As kids get older, then they start to look at the close together lines and the bullseyes. And so once you start to have a 6 or 7 month old, they're going to find the lines to be more interesting than the checkerboards and the circles. And that's something that we're going to notice with infant development, is that what is really super interesting to a little baby is boring to an older baby, and they will stare at something else. They'll put their attention on something else. So with age, they need more and more complexity, and they need more and more novelty as they get older. When they're younger, they like things that are familiar, and then as they start getting into 6 and 7 months of age, they start to turn their attention towards novelty, new things that they've never seen before. So there we go. Oops, my animation wasn't right. So part of that complexity and novelty issue, and the tracking and scanning that I gave you an example with faces, babies tend to attend to faces a lot. They really do prefer, over any other object that they can stare at, they prefer objects that look like faces. So this one on the left looks kind of like a face, right? It's a rudimentary face. Babies who are less than 6 months old will stare more at the one on the left than they will at the one on the right. The one on the left is familiar, it looks like something that they've seen before, and so they'll spend their time staring at it when they're young babies. Once they get over 6 months of age, they'll start to stare at the one on the right more because it's surprising. Like, it kind of looks like it could be a face, but something's wrong with it. And so they'll stare at it longer, trying to figure out, what is this object? It has the shape of a head and it has the organization of a face, but it's upside down. And, they really, as they get older, the thing on the right will be much more interesting to them. So they prefer faces in general all the time. But if we overlap that with the tendency to prefer novelty with age, we're going to find that older babies are going to prefer the object on the right. Younger babies will prefer the object on the left because it looks like a face. What about depth perception? Well, that is the baby's ability to tell that some things are closer together and closer to them and some things are farther away from them is measured using a device called the visual cliff. So here we have a picture of the visual cliff, and what you can see is that the surface that the baby is on has a checkerboard pattern that is made out of the exact same size checkerboard as what is on the floor down there by mom's feet. Mom is put on the far side of the cliff and calls the baby, and in case the baby makes the wrong decision, the whole thing's covered in plexiglass so that the baby won't actually fall. So what we want to know is, can the baby tell that there's a cliff there, that actually if they were to go ahead and crawl across there, that's a space, that they would actually fall into space, that those checkerboards looking smaller on the floor means that they're farther away. That's what this is designed to measure. What they've found is that once babies can crawl, they won't crawl across the visual cliff. Crawling seems to help babies to figure out distance, depth. And so a baby who can't crawl yet, of course, can't even crawl across the visual cliff. But within 1 day of starting to crawl, they will stop crawling across the visual cliff. So 1 day of practice will teach them that information about depth. Now, I've got this picture of a baby at the head of the stairs because a lot of times students are perplexed when we're in face-to-face classes, and they'll say, well, wait a minute, then why do babies fall off of the couch? Or why do babies crawl down the stairs and tumble? This is, if you look at this view for this baby, those stairs, that's pretty subtle, right? And it's only, how tall is a step? 8 inches. As opposed to the visual cliff, it's more like 36 inches. So it's noticeably different, that the size of the checkerboard pattern that the baby is kneeling on compared to the checkerboard on the ground. On the staircase, it's a lot more subtle, and so you should never trust a baby near a staircase because their depth perception is not up to the task. They don't see that necessarily as a drop-off, and they'll just crawl right off of it. Interestingly, once they start to walk and you put them on the visual cliff or you put them at the top of a staircase, they will actually, for the first day after they've learned to walk, they will walk off the stairs and they'll walk off that visual cliff for that first day. It takes, again, 24 hours of practice from this new height before they actually learn the new depth and start to protect themselves. And so it's not like it is clear, it is absolutely clear that babies are not born with depth perception that would prevent them from crawling off a cliff or falling off of stairs. That's developed through experience with the world. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk about is something I never talked about in the newborn, and that's the fifth type of sense, which is touch, haptic perception. Babies explore the world with their mouths, right? Especially the first year of life, they explore the world with their mouth. This baby's doing exactly what we're talking about. And part of the reason why they explore with their mouths is because they've got more nerve endings in their mouths than in any other part of their body. They can get more information through the touch receptors that are in their mouth, on their lips and their tongues, than they can by looking at the object. So in that first year of life, they're going to spend a lot of time putting things in their mouths, gumming them, biting them, things like that, possibly swallowing them. And that's why we have to be so careful to keep stuff off the floor that's a choking hazard. But that's early haptic perception. They're not really tasting the objects. We often wonder, like, why would you put that in your mouth? It's not going to taste good. But they want to feel it. And so that's why they're doing that. As they age, this baby who we're looking at in this picture, probably, even though it's holding an object with its hands, doesn't have a great understanding that those are its hands. It doesn't even really realize that it has control over its hands and things like that. And so touch with your hands, that is so important to us as adults. You can reach out and touch something, and like when I go to type, I feel for those little bumps that are on the F and the J key to make sure I've got my fingers on the right position on the keyboard. That kind of haptic touch, babies even up to 2 years of age don't really have that kind of ability to process information from their fingertips and internalize a visual image of what they're touching. That's going to grow and develop as they age. So really, now they, of course, enjoy touch. Like, they like to be soothed with touch and those kinds of things. So I don't want to discount that. Of course, that's very soothing to have your back rubbed or your butt patted or, these kinds of things. Obviously, they feel things. I'm just saying that, like, they don't get the kind of information from their hands that you can get, the kind of information from their hands that you can get. So a lot of development left to go, but a lot of things that have really kick-started during this phase of life. And so when we get to physical development in the next phase, stage, of early childhood, you're going to see all sorts of growth and development happening with physical development. So I'm excited and looking forward to that. But for now, I will see you next in our chapter on cognition in the first 2 years. All right, see you then.